Growing from seed is essential for your success as a gardener. It allows you to start earlier and it gives you those seed starts that can be ready to plant out when you've harvested other plants. It also helps you to increase your yields and saves you time and space. I'm Tony O'Neill and this is Simplified Gardening. By now, we're all throwing around seeds like they're going out of fashion. But by sowing seeds indoors, you get an early start. And this means that you can plan your garden much better and be a more productive gardener and get higher yields throughout the year. The first thing to consider is where we're going to sow our seeds. Now ideally we'll have a dedicated area for this, like a seed sowing bench, just a small area where we can set up and we can have our trays and propagators and everything that we need ready to hand, and we can dump the compost or the seed starting mix that we're going to use, and it's all in one place to make the sowing much easier. Then the next thing we need to consider is where we're going to store these seeds while they're germinating and growing into small little seed starts. So that's what we're going to look at today. And for this, there are loads of things that we can do. We can use a windowsill, a grow tent, a heated propagation bench, or even a complete grow room like I have here. Now, what I will say is, when you've decided whichever one you're going to use, there are two factors in which you need to take into consideration. And the first of those is lighting, and the second is heating. Seeds need a certain temperature to germinate, and it can be as low as 12 to 15 degrees C or 53 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, or as high as 27 degrees C or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It really depends on what seed you're sowing and the variety of plants. There are many ways in which to heat your polytunnel greenhouse, your grow tents, and any sort of propagation areas you have. There's far too many to sort of go into more detail in this video, but what I will say is I have a dedicated video on heating these areas, and I'll put a link down in the show notes below so that you can go and check that out if you decide to. And as I said earlier on, lighting is really important also. You wouldn't notice it today, it's quite bright here, but we've had storm after storm and it's been really dark and dingy. But when it comes to lighting your areas for your seed propagation, then there are lots of things that we can look at. There are things like the sodium lamps and LED, T5s and fluorescent. So there is lots of different lighting aspects, and they're all designed to stop your little seedlings from going leggy. So nice short stout seedlings is what we're after. So when can we start sowing indoors? Well, we can start sowing seeds as early as January, because that's when the equinox is kicked in and the light levels start climbing. So we can look at sowing things like cabbage, radish, chicory, chilies, and even sweet peas. And as time goes on and we go further and further on in the months into March and April, then we'll be sowing more and more, and by that point it'll be crazy, it'll be all hands on. There are many containers to sow seeds indoors. They range from cell trays. These have multiple compartments and are usually small in size, containing 4 to 96 cells, and there are some trays that hold much more. These are made up of plastic and they're reusable time and time again if you look after them properly. Some people may not want to use plastics, and there are alternatives such as coir and fibre pots. Now, the downside to these is that you need to purchase these every single time you want to grow, so it can get very expensive. But don't get me wrong, I understand these sorts of people that want to reduce the plastic usage, but I think the world's gone a little bit crazy with this, and I'll give you my reasoning behind that. Now, plastic is a product that is designed to do a specific job, and it does that job fantastically. The problem is us. We've taken it for granted for way too long, and we're using it for all sorts of stuff like one-time use plastics. Okay, we're talking straws and lids of things and packaging fruits and vegetables that don't even need to be packaged. So what I would suggest is consider using plastic because it does the job so well, but make sure that you can get long-term use out of it and that it's recyclable afterwards, because plastic in itself isn't a bad product, even if we have to use undesirable ways of producing it. But if you can make sure that it lasts time and time again, then there's no reason for it. And I'd like to give the analogy of people who say that, oh, I don't want to use plastics in the garden. When you take compost, for instance, if you're buying that at the shops, it comes in a plastic bag, so you are contributing whether you like it or not. It's very difficult for people who are growing on small scale to get enough compost that it doesn't come in a plastic bag unless they're producing it themselves. But also take your car, like 40% of your vehicle is probably made from plastic. It's all well and good to say I don't want to use plastic, and if we can cut it down, great. But I've tried the polystyrene things, again made of petroleum anyway, they're no good. I've tried the fibre ones, they're just far too expensive, and I find that the fibre and the coir pots, they don't break down quick enough and they stop that root mass from getting out, and it reduces the yield of your crop. So for me, I am going to use plastic, but I'm going to use it responsibly. And I think a lot of people who have tried getting away from plastic have started coming back to it, but making wiser choices in the pots and things that they are buying. There's one other point. I did try growing without plastic for an entire year, but I had really poor crops and it wasn't able to sustain my family, and that's important because I grow what we eat. The next thing that we could use are things like deep cell or root trainer type trays, and these are fantastic for tall beans and peas and things like this, something that requires a root structure that needs some depth. They're really good for that. So all your beans and pea family, all of that will do really well in root trainers. And of course we have a standard seed tray, which are fantastic for mass sowings of things like lettuce, which can be further pricked out into individual little seed trays or cell plants or even small pots. And obviously we have the individual plant pots as well. Now when we're sowing our seeds, we can just scatter them over the surface of the compost like you would with lettuce and just cover them with a very fine amount of vermiculite or compost, or we can plant them deeper, such as sweet corn, into a root trainer. Now, when planting the seeds, there are some rules that we need to follow, and one of those rules is something called scarification. Now, that's like the nicking or the scratching of the seed coat. Some plants may require it due to the hard sort of husk around the seed itself. And at this time of the year, while we're all starting to sow our seeds, it's really important to not sort of lose our heads and go out and just sow tons and tons and tons of seeds, because it's important to consider what we're going to be doing with all these seeds. Are we going to be harvesting them all at the same time? So we may need to consider about successional sowing. So it's better to sow smaller amounts and more often than sowing huge amounts in one go. And we can save time as well by what's known as multi-sowing seed. Now, things like peas, beetroot, radish, and those types of seeds can all be sown as multi-sown. So that's a number of seeds in a cell or a plant pot. Now, this has major advantages on time saving, because instead of planting them individually, okay, we are putting them all into one little pot. It's much quicker to do, and when it comes to planting out, it's much quicker as well. Now, when these grow, those sorts of seeds will push themselves apart. It'll save you loads of time, it will save you space in the garden, but more importantly, especially in today's climate, it's going to save you compost too. So multi-sown seeds, select a suitable size tray and fill it with compost. Here I'm using some homemade compost mixed with some leaf mold. Fill the tray and tamp it down lightly. I like to compress the compost a little firmer to get more into the cells when they're small like this. in times like these, compost can be difficult to purchase, and being able to produce your own nutrient-dense homemade compost is just as important as learning how to grow from seed. With that in mind, at the end of this video and in the description will be a link to a video which I made about composting that will ensure that you master it from day one. Make sure to watch that after this video, because it really will ensure that you're able to have all the compost you require. Once the tray is full, take the end of a pencil and make a small indent. Remember the golden rule though, seeds need to be covered around 2 times their own depth. Here I'm sowing beetroot. Although the beetroot seed is a multi-seed in itself, I still put 3 or 4 per hole and cover with compost and water this thoroughly. Now, other crops may benefit from being planted individually into a cell, and this takes a little bit more time, but it does save time overall. And certain crops like chilies are a prime example for this, and the reason for this is chilies don't really like their roots to be disturbed, so you can remove them in a full cell or plug of soil and then transplant them into a bigger pot as they grow without disturbing those roots, and it really will make your life much easier. If you try separating chilies as little individual seedlings and then potting them on, you're going to lose some of those plants. So specific plants are better off to be sown individually. Once you've sown your seeds, it's important to label them correctly and then place them somewhere where they can germinate. Now here I have a dedicated room in the back of my polytunnel, and this is double skinned plastic, so we have a room built within the polytunnel. This does 2 things for me. It allows me to double insulate from the weather outside in the first instance, but also I can heat just this room. And if I want to heat this room, number 1, I'm not trying to heat a whole polytunnel, and number 2, I'm not having to use the fuels in order to heat such a big area, and I can contain it here. Now in here I have some shelving that I've built, and I have tomato trays on these shelving, and inside these tomato trays I've got capillary matting, and that allows me to water from below and to water lots of plants in one go, and the capillary matting will help to hold that water and release it as the plants require it. So it's a much better system than overhead watering. And I've got 8 of these tomato trays in this room. So once they've germinated and they are cold and I want to move them out here, I can place them on these tables here. These are essentially steel trays in effect that can hold water if I want them to. Again, I will place some capillary matting in these, and these will be ideal for the cooler crops as well that don't need the heat in which to germinate. So we'll put capillary matting, and as you can see, I've got a whole 34 feet of just table space there. And then underneath that table space, I have more of these tomato trays with capillary matting in on the actual grow bed, and we can place them down there as well because there's plenty of light in here. So there are multiple areas in which I can then bring seeds out and keep them at multiple temperatures. This makes things much easier, and preparation for your seed sowing is really important, and by having this sort of stuff ready, it will make your life much easier and your production much faster. Now when it comes to putting them out onto these benches, it's recommended to have some fleece handy, because after all, this is just a single skin plastic. Now polytunnel plastics are not great for holding out the frost, so by having just some horticultural fleece that you can put over on nights that you know it's going to drop below 0 and there's going to be a frost, you can just give them that little added extra protection, and in the morning you can come up and rip that off. As you can see, storage is really important as well. Now we're in that heated grow room at the moment below those 2 tiers of the tomato trays, and this is where I've stored all of my cell trays, my individual pots, any ceramics, anything that I want to use is all stored here, and it's stacked up in the little neat bundles that I require, so I can come and grab it when I want to sow my seeds and I know exactly where it is. I'm not fighting looking for it. Now, all of these seed trays and products that I've been talking about for sowing can be purchased from Oakland Gardens. Now, Oakland Gardens has been a sponsor of this channel for a long time, and they do some fantastic deals for you guys. They produce a discount code every single month for you, and I've got to say that the quality of all of their trays and pots and stuff is fantastic, and even more importantly, is cheap. Now, you can only get it if you're from the UK, unfortunately, because they don't ship abroad yet. Whether that changes in the future, I'm not sure. But for now, anything that you see me using over the next sort of couple of months with sowing seeds can all be purchased from Oakland Gardens, and there'll be a link in the description below. The last thing about heating that I want to bring up is in the back of that grow room I have there. I've got multiple ways to heat it. I use a paraffin heater sometimes, it depends because paraffin is expensive, but at one end of it I have a paraffin heater, but I can also use the 100-hour candles that we made a video on, or the alcohol burner that I made a video on a few years ago, and all of those things will heat that grow room very, very easily. And all we're trying to do, guys, is to keep our seedlings warm around about 10 degrees. A lot of people think that they should have their polytunnels or their grow rooms or whatever it is up at 20 and 25 degrees to get growth. You don't need that. Ideally, anything from around about sort of 7 to 10 degrees would be perfect. Anything more than that is not required at this time of year, because we want small, short, stubby growth until we're able to put them out. Otherwise, we're going to end up with huge plants, and when you put them out, they're going to get shocked. And talking of shock, well, we then need to consider hardening off our seedlings when we put them out. Now, all that takes is moving the seedlings out on nice bright days like today outside, let them have a couple of hours of light, and then bring them back into the tunnel. And you do that on gradual time, so it gets longer over a period of about 2 weeks, until eventually you're just bringing them in for the night time, and then after a couple of days of that, they're ready to go out, and this will reduce that shock for them. Once you've started putting things out, well, guess what? That frees up space for you to do those successional sowings, so that you can have plug plants ready in which to replace plants that you harvest with. So a few weeks before you're due to harvest, start sowing some more seed. So now you know how useful growing from seed can be. So let me know in the comments below how many of you have started sowing already, and what have you sown already. That way the whole community can take a look down there and they can see exactly what we should be sowing at this time of the month. If you've got value from this video, then you can subscribe here, and when you've done that, remember that compost video I was telling you about? Well, it's right here. Go and watch that now, because I promise you it is going to save you an absolute fortune, and you'll have all the compost that you'll ever need. I'm Tony O'Neill. This is Simplified Gardening, where I show you how to garden in a simpler way. Remember, folks, you reap what you sow, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.